The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows of the Patterson family home, casting warm golden rays across the breakfast table where 12-year-old Marcus sat hunched over his cereal bowl, his dark hair still messy from sleep. Across from him, his 10-year-old sister Emma hummed softly while carefully arranging her toast into perfect triangles, her auburn curls catching the light as she moved. To any outsider looking in, they appeared to be just another typical sibling pair starting their day, but beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary morning, years of resentment and confusion had been building in Marcus's young heart. Their mother, Sarah Patterson, bustled around the kitchen in her navy blue nurse scrubs, preparing lunch boxes with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing this routine for years. Her husband, David, sat at the head of the table reading the morning news on his tablet while sipping his coffee, occasionally glancing up to smile at his children with the kind of contentment that comes from a life well lived. The kitchen was filled with the comfortable sounds of a family preparing for their day, the gentle clink of spoons against bowls, the rustle of newspaper pages, and the quiet chatter that binds families together in these precious morning moments. But Marcus felt anything but comfortable. As he watched Emma carefully cut her toast, something inside him twisted with an emotion he couldn't quite name. It had been building for months now, this feeling of displacement, of not quite belonging in the way he thought he should. He had overheard fragments of conversations between his parents and their friends, comments about Emma being such a blessing, and how lucky she was to have found such a loving family. At 12 years old, Marcus's understanding of these adult conversations was incomplete, but he had pieced together enough to know that Emma was adopted, and somehow this knowledge had begun to eat away at him. The trigger came when Emma accidentally knocked over Marcus's glass of orange juice while reaching for the salt shaker. The sticky liquid spread across the table, soaking into Marcus's homework that he had left out from a night before. "Emma!" he shouted, jumping up from his chair as the juice dripped onto his favorite sneakers. "Look what you did. You ruined everything." Emma's face immediately crumpled with guilt and concern as she grabbed napkins and began frantically trying to clean up the mess. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. I didn't mean to. Let me help you fix your homework," she said, her voice trembling with the kind of genuine remorse that only children possess. But instead of accepting her apology, something dark and ugly rose up in Marcus's chest. All the confusion, all the feelings of being somehow less important than Emma in his parents' eyes, all the whispered conversations he had overheard came flooding out in a torrent of cruel words. "You can't fix anything," he screamed, his voice cracking with emotion. "You're not even really part of this family. You're adopted, which means you don't belong here. Mom and Dad aren't your real parents, and I'm not your real brother. You're just some random kid they felt sorry for." The words hung in the air like poison, and the kitchen fell into a stunned silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Emma's face went white as if she had been physically struck. Her small hands, still clutching the damp napkins, began to shake as tears welled up in her eyes. She had always known she was adopted. Her parents had been honest with her from an early age, explaining it in terms of love and choice rather than abandonment. But hearing it weaponized against her by the brother she adored felt like having her heart torn from her chest. "Marcus, that's not true," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mom and Dad chose me because they wanted me. They love me just like they love you." But Marcus was too caught up in his own pain and anger to hear the hurt in her voice. Sarah dropped the lunchbox she had been packing and turned to face her son with a look of shock and disappointment that cut through Marcus like a knife. David slowly set down his tablet, his face grave as he processed what had just happened. "Marcus Patterson," Sarah said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and heartbreak, "how could you say something so cruel? Emma is your sister, adopted or not, and she loves you more than anything in this world." Emma had begun to cry in earnest now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks as she stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, still holding those crumpled napkins like a shield against the cruelty of Marcus's words. But Marcus wasn't finished. The floodgates had opened, and years of suppressed feelings came pouring out. "She's not my real sister," he shouted back, his young voice filled with a venom that shocked even himself. "Real families are connected by blood. She's just some stranger you brought home because you felt bad for her. I'm your real son, the one who actually belongs here. Why you always make such a big deal about her when I'm the one who's actually part of this family?" The words felt powerful as they left his mouth, like he was finally speaking some fundamental truth that had been hidden from everyone. David stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the kitchen floor with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the tense atmosphere. His face had gone pale, and Sarah reached out to grab his arm as if she sensed what was coming. "Marcus," David said, his voice carefully controlled but heavy with emotion, "you need to stop talking right now and think about what you're saying. You're hurting your sister, and you're saying things that aren't true." But Marcus was too far gone, too caught up in his righteous indignation to recognize the warning signs in his father's voice. "They're not lies." Marcus shot back, his fists clenched at his sides. "Everyone knows Emma's adopted. I've heard you talking about it. I've heard you tell people about how you rescued her and gave her a home. But I'm different. I'm your real son. I belong here in a way she never will." Emma let out a small sob and turned to run from the kitchen, but Sarah caught her gently by the shoulders. "Stay here, sweetheart," she said softly, her own eyes now filled with tears. "There's something your brother needs to understand." David looked at his wife with an expression of profound sadness mixed with resignation. They had always planned to have this conversation with Marcus when he was older, when he could better understand the complexities of their family's story. But his cruelty toward Emma had forced their hand, and now they had no choice but to reveal the truth that would shatter his world and hopefully rebuild it into something more compassionate. "Son," David said, his voice heavy with the weight of what he was about to say, "sit down. There's something we need to tell you about our family, something we should have explained to you sooner." Marcus remained standing, his arms crossed defiantly across his chest, but something in his father's tone made him pause. Sarah guided Emma to a chair and sat beside her, wrapping her arm around the little girl's shoulders while keeping her eyes fixed on Marcus. "Marcus," Sarah began, her voice gentle but firm, "what you just said to your sister was not only cruel, it was based on something that isn't true. Emma isn't the only adopted child in this family." The words seemed to hang in the air like a physical presence, and Marcus felt his stomach drop even though he didn't yet understand what his mother was trying to tell him. "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, his voice suddenly smaller, some of his bravado beginning to fade as he sensed that the conversation was taking a turn he hadn't expected. David moved closer to his son, his face filled with the kind of gentle compassion that only comes from unconditional love. "Marcus, you are adopted too. We adopted you when you were just 6 months old. Emma came to us when she was 3, but you both came to us in the same way, because we wanted you, because we chose you, because we loved you from the moment we met you." The world seemed to tilt on its axis, and Marcus felt as if the ground beneath his feet had suddenly become unstable. "That's not true," he whispered, shaking his head back and forth, as if he could physically reject the information his parents were giving him. "You're lying. You're just saying that to make me feel bad for what I said to Emma. I look like you, Dad. People say I have your eyes. That proves I'm really yours." But even as he spoke, Marcus could feel the certainty he had built his identity around beginning to crumble. Sarah reached into a kitchen drawer and pulled out a manila folder that Marcus had never seen before. With gentle hands, she opened it and spread several documents across the table, official papers with legal seals, photographs, and certificates that told the story of how Marcus had come to be part of their family. "These are your adoption papers, sweetheart," she said softly. "And here are some pictures from the day we brought you home from the hospital. You were so tiny, so perfect, and we fell in love with you instantly." Marcus approached the table with shaking legs, his eyes scanning the documents that seemed to rewrite everything he thought he knew about himself. There was his name on official letterhead, there were signatures from judges and social workers, there were photographs of himself as a baby in the arms of 2 people who looked like strangers, and yet were somehow his parents. "But why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice breaking as the full weight of the revelation began to settle over him like a heavy blanket. David sat down beside his son, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "We were waiting for the right time, son. We wanted you to be old enough to understand that being adopted doesn't make you any less our child, any less loved, any less part of this family. We never wanted you to feel different or less than, and we were afraid that telling you too young might make you feel that way." Sarah nodded in agreement, her eyes still glistening with unshed tears. "We love both of you exactly the same way with all of our hearts. The way you came to us doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here, that you're ours, that you're family." Emma, who had been quietly listening to this revelation, slowly got up from her chair and walked over to where Marcus stood frozen beside the table. Her face was still streaked with tears from his earlier cruelty, but her expression had softened into something approaching understanding. "Marcus," she said quietly, reaching out to touch his arm, we're both adopted. That means we were both chosen. That means Mom and Dad wanted us both so much that they went through all kinds of paperwork and waiting and hoping just to bring us home." The simple wisdom in his little sister's words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had spent so much time trying to establish his superiority over Emma, trying to prove that he belonged in a way she didn't, that he had completely missed the truth that they were both chosen, both wanted, both loved in exactly the same way. The foundation of his identity, built on the belief that his connection to his parents was somehow more real than Emma's, had been completely destroyed, leaving him feeling lost and confused and ashamed. "Emma, Marcus started to speak, but the words caught in his throat. How could he possibly apologize for the terrible things he had said? How could he explain that his cruelty had come from his own insecurity and confusion? How could he make her understand that he had never meant to hurt her, even though he so clearly had? "I'm so sorry," he finally managed to whisper, his voice thick with tears he was trying hard not to shed. "I said horrible things to you, and they weren't even true. I don't know why I was so mean." Emma looked up at her brother with eyes that held far more wisdom and compassion than any 10-year-old should possess. Despite the hurt he had caused her, despite the cruelty of his words, she could see the confusion and pain in his face, and her heart went out to him. "You were scared," she said simply. "Sometimes when people are scared or confused, they say mean things. I forgive you, Marcus, but it really hurt when you said I didn't belong here. This is my home too, and you're my brother, even if we don't share the same birth parents." Sarah and David watched this exchange between their children with hearts that were simultaneously breaking and healing. They had always known that the conversation about adoption would be difficult, but they had never imagined it would come about in such a painful way. "Both of you need to understand something very important," Sarah said, moving to kneel in front of her children so she could look them both in the eyes. "Family isn't about blood or biology. Family is about love, about choice, about the people who stand by you and support you and care for you no matter what. Dad and I chose both of you, and that choice wasn't random or based on pity. It was based on love." David joined his wife on the floor, creating a small circle with their 2 children in the kitchen that had witnessed so much pain just moments before. "When we decided to adopt, we weren't looking for just any children," he explained, his voice gentle but firm. "We were looking for our children, the ones who would complete our family. And when we met each of you, we knew immediately that you were meant to be ours. Marcus, you were this tiny baby who would grab onto our fingers and not let go. Emma, you were this little girl who looked at us with such trust and hope that it took our breath away." Marcus felt tears finally spilling over as he began to understand the magnitude of what had happened that morning. Not only had he discovered that everything he thought he knew about his identity was wrong, but he had used his false beliefs to wound the sister who had always looked up to him, who had always been nothing but kind and loving toward him. "I've been so stupid," he said, his voice thick with regret. "I thought being adopted meant Emma wasn't really part of our family, but we're both adopted and we're both really part of this family. I made her feel bad about something that isn't bad at all." Emma reached out and took Marcus's hand in her small one, squeezing it gently. "Being adopted is actually kind of special," she said, her natural optimism beginning to shine through despite the morning's trauma. "It means our parents looked at all the kids in the world and decided they wanted us specifically. That's pretty amazing when you think about it." Her simple perspective on their shared experience helped Marcus begin to see adoption not as something that made them less than other children, but as something that made their family unique and chosen and intentional. The 4 of them sat together on the kitchen floor for a long time, talking through the complex emotions and revelations of the morning. Marcus learned about his birth parents, a young couple who had loved him but weren't ready to care for a child. He learned about the months of preparation Sarah and David had gone through before adopting him, the classes they had taken, the home visits they had endured, the anticipation they had felt waiting to meet their son. He learned that Emma's story was different but equally filled with love. She had come to them from foster care, where she had spent her early years with people who cared for her but couldn't provide the permanent home she needed. As the morning progressed and the initial shock began to wear off, Marcus found himself looking at his family with new eyes. The easy affection between his parents and Emma, which had sometimes made him jealous, now made perfect sense. It wasn't favoritism, it was just the natural love between family members. The way his parents had always talked about both of their children with equal pride and joy wasn't an act or an attempt to make Emma feel included. It was genuine love for both of their chosen children. "I need to apologize to Emma properly," Marcus said finally, turning to face his sister with a seriousness that made him seem older than his 12 years. Emma, I said terrible things to you this morning, things that were wrong and cruel and stupid. I was angry and confused, but that's no excuse for hurting you. You are my real sister, you are part of our real family, and I'm sorry I ever made you feel like you weren't. Can you forgive me? Emma looked at her brother with eyes that still held traces of the morning's hurt, but also with the resilience and generosity of spirit that had always defined her character. I already forgave you, Marcus, she said softly. But I need you to promise me something. Promise me that you won't ever say things like that again, not to me or to anyone else who's adopted. It really hurt, and I don't want other kids to feel that way. Marcus nodded solemnly, understanding that his sister was asking for more than just a promise not to hurt her again. She was asking him to become someone who would protect other children from the kind of cruelty he had shown her. I promise, Emma. And I promise I'll try to be a better brother to you. I've been so worried about proving that I belonged in this family that I forgot to appreciate that I already do belong, and so do you. Sarah and David exchanged a look of profound relief and pride as they watched their children work through this difficult situation with more maturity and grace than many adults could have managed. The morning had started with cruel words and tears, but was ending with understanding, forgiveness, and a deeper appreciation for the bonds that held their family together. We're proud of both of you, Sarah said, gathering her children into a family hug that felt different somehow, more intentional, more aware of itself, more grateful for what they had. As they finally got up from the kitchen floor and began to clean up the remnants of their interrupted breakfast, Marcus found himself seeing everything with new clarity. The family photos on the refrigerator told the story not of biological connections, but of chosen love. The height marks on the doorframe measured not just physical growth, but the growth of a family that had been built through intention and commitment rather than accident. The easy banter and shared jokes that filled their home weren't the result of shared DNA, but of shared experiences and chosen intimacy. At school that day, Marcus found it difficult to concentrate on his lessons. His mind kept returning to the morning's revelations and to his new understanding of what family really meant. During lunch, when his friend Jake made an offhand comment about adopted kids being different, Marcus felt his stomach clench with a combination of anger and protectiveness. That's not true, he said firmly, surprising both Jake and himself with the strength of his response. Adopted kids aren't different. Their families just came together in a different way, but they're still real families with real love. Jake looked confused by Marcus's vehement response to what he had thought was a casual comment. Okay, man, I didn't mean anything by it, he said, backing down from what he sensed was becoming a more serious conversation than he had intended. But Marcus wasn't ready to let it go. He thought about Emma and how she would have felt if she had heard Jake's comment, and he felt a fierce protectiveness that he had never experienced before. It matters though, Marcus continued, his voice calmer but still firm. When you say stuff like that, it makes kids who are adopted feel like there's something wrong with them or their families, and there isn't. My sister is adopted, and she's just as much my real sister as if we had been born to the same parents. He didn't mention that he was adopted too. That felt like information he needed more time to process before sharing with his friends, but standing up for Emma felt like the first step in becoming the brother he wanted to be. When Marcus got home from school that afternoon, he found Emma in the living room working on a puzzle, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration as she tried to fit together pieces of a landscape scene. Instead of heading straight to his room to start his homework, as he usually did, Marcus sat down beside her on the floor. Can I help? He asked, and Emma's face lit up with a smile that made Marcus's heart ache with how easily she forgave, how quickly she welcomed him back into her space. They worked on the puzzle together in comfortable silence for a while, and Marcus found himself marveling at his sister's patience and persistence. She would try piece after piece, never getting frustrated when they didn't fit, just methodically working her way through the possibilities until she found the right match. It occurred to him that this was probably how she approached most things in life, with optimism and determination, and a belief that if she kept trying, things would work out. Emma, Marcus said quietly as they worked, I've been thinking about what happened this morning, and I want you to know that I'm really sorry. Not just for the mean things I said, but for making you feel like you had to defend your place in our family. You shouldn't have to do that. You belong here just as much as anyone. Emma looked up from the puzzle piece she was examining and smiled at her brother with the kind of pure, uncomplicated affection that children are capable of. Thank you for saying that, Marcus. It means a lot to me. I know you were just confused and scared. I get confused and scared sometimes too. Her ability to empathize with him even after he had hurt her was humbling, and Marcus felt a renewed determination to be worthy of her forgiveness. That evening at dinner, the family dynamic felt different, more honest somehow, more aware of itself. Sarah and David had spent the day discussing how to handle the situation moving forward, how to help both children process the morning's revelations and build a stronger foundation for their family relationships. They had decided to be more open about adoption in general, to talk about it as a normal and positive way that families come together rather than something that needed to be hidden or revealed dramatically. "I've been thinking," David said as they sat around the dinner table, "that maybe we should start celebrating Adoption Day for both of you. Not instead of your birthdays, but in addition to them. A day to celebrate the day you each became part of our family officially." Emma clapped her hands together with excitement at the idea, but Marcus looked thoughtful. "What would we do on Adoption Day?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious about this new family tradition his father was proposing. He was still adjusting to thinking of himself as adopted, still processing what that meant for his identity and his place in the family, but the idea of celebrating it rather than hiding it felt right somehow. Sarah smiled at her son's question. "We could look at photos from when you each first came home, tell stories about those early days, maybe make your favorite meals, or do activities you especially enjoy. The point would be to celebrate the fact that our family was formed intentionally, that we chose each other." The idea appealed to Marcus because it reframed adoption from something that made him different or less than into something that made his family special and purposeful. Over the following weeks and months, Marcus found himself gradually adjusting to his new understanding of himself and his family. He learned more about his birth parents, not enough to make him feel conflicted about his loyalty to the parents who had raised him, but enough to satisfy his natural curiosity about where he came from. He learned that they had been teenagers who loved him but recognized that they weren't equipped to provide the stable home he needed. Their decision to place him for adoption hadn't been about not wanting him, but about wanting what was best for him. More importantly, Marcus began to understand the strength and intentionality that had gone into building his family. His parents hadn't stumbled into parenthood accidentally. They had prepared for it, planned for it, fought for it through bureaucracy and paperwork and waiting periods. They had taken classes on child development and trauma-informed parenting. They had undergone background checks and home visits and interviews. They had proven their commitment to being parents in ways that biological parents never had to. His relationship with Emma also began to change and deepen. Where before he had sometimes felt competitive with her for their parents' attention, now he felt protective of her in a way that surprised him with its intensity. When he heard other kids at school make thoughtless comments about adoption or foster care, he spoke up without hesitation. When Emma struggled with homework or felt sad about something, he made time to help her and comfort her in ways he never had before. The puzzle they had worked on together that first afternoon became a symbol of sorts for their relationship. It sat completed on a table in the living room, a reminder that beautiful things could be created when people worked together patiently and persistently. Sometimes Marcus would catch Emma looking at it with a satisfied smile, and he would remember the concentration on her face as she had methodically tried piece after piece until she found the right fit. One evening several months after the morning that had changed everything, Marcus found Emma crying quietly in her room. When he asked what was wrong, she told him that a girl at school had said that adopted kids weren't really loved because their real parents had given them away. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, not just because they hurt Emma, but because he recognized the kind of thinking that had once driven his own cruelty toward his sister. "Emma," he said, sitting down on her bed and putting his arm around her shoulders, "that girl doesn't know what she's talking about. Our birth parents didn't give us away because they didn't love us. They made adoption plans for us because they did love us, because they wanted us to have the best possible lives even if they couldn't provide that themselves. And Mom and Dad didn't adopt us because they felt sorry for us. They adopted us because they wanted us specifically, because they looked at us and knew we belonged in their family." Emma leaned against her brother, drawing comfort from his steady presence and his words. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Mom and Dad hadn't adopted us," she said quietly. "Would we have found other families? Would we have found each other?" Marcus considered her question seriously, understanding that she was grappling with some of the same identity questions that had once confused him. "I don't know what would have happened," he said honestly, "but I know what did happen. We found each other, we found Mom and Dad, and we became a family. Not by accident, not by default, but by choice. And every day, we keep choosing to be a family by how we treat each other and love each other." Emma nodded against his shoulder, and Marcus felt a surge of protectiveness and love for this little girl who had taught him so much about forgiveness and resilience. As they sat together in the quiet of Emma's room, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that morning in the kitchen when he had lashed out in confusion and pain. He had learned that the foundations of identity he had built his sense of self on were false, but in losing those false foundations, he had discovered something much more solid and meaningful. He had learned that family was not about biology or blood or accidents of birth, but about choice and commitment and daily acts of love. The boy who had once shamed his sister for being adopted had become a fierce defender of adoption and adoptive families. The child who had once felt insecure about his place in his family had become secure in the knowledge that he was chosen and wanted and loved unconditionally. And the brother who had once used cruel words as weapons had become someone who used words to heal and protect and comfort. Years later, when Marcus was older and could look back on that morning with the perspective that comes with maturity, he would recognize it as one of the most important days of his life. Not because it was easy or comfortable, it had been neither of those things, but because it had forced him to confront his own prejudices and insecurities and grow beyond them. It had taught him that the truth, even when it was difficult and painful, was always better than the comfortable lies we sometimes tell ourselves. Emma, for her part, would remember that day not primarily for the cruelty of Marcus's words, though those had certainly hurt, but for the grace with which their family had handled the crisis. She would remember her parents' gentle honesty, her brother's genuine remorse and growth, and the way their family had emerged from a moment of potential fracture stronger and more united than before. She would remember learning that forgiveness was not about forgetting hurt, but about choosing love despite it. The kitchen where it all happened would witness many more family moments over the years, birthday celebrations and homework sessions, serious conversations and silly jokes, ordinary meals that bound them together in the rhythms of daily life. But it would always hold special significance as the place where their family had been tested and had chosen love, where cruel words had been spoken and forgiveness had been offered, where the true meaning of family had been discovered and embraced. In the end, Marcus learned that being adopted didn't make him or Emma less than other children. It made them chosen in a way that was deliberate and meaningful. He learned that family was not about biology, but about love, not about accidents, but about intentions, not about what connected you in the past, but about what you chose to build together in the present and future. And most importantly, he learned that love, real, deep, transformative love, had the power to heal even the cruelest wounds and bind people together in ways that no blood relation ever could.